a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs.
It's Roger
on
Griffiths and Sean
countries
Spear
throughout
Live.
the
We're just
world.
listening in
Reciprocal.
on the
That means
president
they do
right
it to
now.
us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that. This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly. With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again, greater than ever before. Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers.
Who are tuning in now, this is Roger Griffiths, publisher of The Hub. We're listening in on President Donald Trump. I'm joined by Sean Spear, our co-founder and editor-at-large. David Frum will be joining us at a quarter past the hour. But let's go back to the president and listen to his remarks.
President J.D. Vance. J.D., thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Where are you, J.D.? No, that wasn't too hard to find. I was looking, you know, he likes to take a low-key attitude, so usually we sit right in front. He's gaining a lot of confidence, Mike, isn't he? And nearly my entire cabinet is here, as well as Speaker Mike Johnson, who's done an amazing job. And with the great success we had last night in Florida, we have a majority of 7. And 7's like a lot when we had it at 1, right? You've done a fantastic job. And many of the members of the House and Senate are with us. Senators, Congressmen, thank you all for being with us. We appreciate it. For decades, the United States slashed our trade barriers on other countries, while those nations placed massive tariffs on our products and created outrageous non-monetary barriers to decimate our industries. And in many cases, the non-monetary barriers were worse than the monetary ones. They manipulated their currencies, subsidized their exports, stole our intellectual property, imposed exorbitant VAT taxes to disadvantage our products, adopted unfair rules and technical standards, and created filthy pollution havens. They were absolutely filthy, but they always came to us and they said, we're violating, we should pay for it. It's all detailed in a very big report by the U.S. Trade Representative on Foreign Trade Barriers.
I sense, Sean, that this could take a while, so buckle in there, my friend. And again, viewers, thanks for tuning in here. We're going to continue to listen to President Trump. David will be joining us at a quarter past the hour. Hopefully, we'll get soon to the news in terms of, is there a big global trade tariff that will be announced or not? Let's go back to the president.
Let me offer just a few examples of the vicious attacks our workers have faced for so many years. The United States charges other countries only a 2.4 tariff on motorcycles. Meanwhile, Thailand and others are charging much higher prices, like 60%. India charges 70%. Vietnam charges 75%, and others are even higher than that. Likewise, until today, the United States has for decades charged a 2.5 tariff. Think of that, 2.5% on foreign-made automobiles. The European Union charges us more than 10% tariffs, and they have 20% VATs, much, much higher. India charges 70%, and perhaps worst of all are the non-monetary restrictions imposed by South Korea, Japan, and very many other nations. As a result of these colossal trade barriers, 81% of the cars in South Korea are made in South Korea. 94% of the cars in Japan are made in Japan. Toyota sells 1 million foreign-made automobiles into the United States, and General Motors sells almost none. Ford sells very little. None of our companies are allowed to go into other countries. And I say that friend and foe. And in many cases, the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade. But such horrendous imbalances have devastated our industrial base and put our national security at risk. I don't blame these other countries at all for this calamity. I blame former presidents and past leaders who weren't doing their job. They let it happen, and they let it happen to an extent that nobody can even believe. That's why, effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles.
Okay, just autos for now. We'll see what's up next.
Brian, I'd like to have you come up here for a second, okay? I just see him sitting. He's been a fan of ours, and he understands this business a lot better than the economists, a lot better than anybody. Brian, say a few words, please, would you?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
It's a great honor to have you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I grew up just north of Detroit, Michigan, in Macomb County, known as the home of the Reagan Democrats. My first vote for president was for Ronald Reagan. I thought that was going to be the best president I ever saw in my lifetime until Donald J. Trump came along. I have watched my entire life, I have watched plant after plant after plant in Detroit and in the metro Detroit area close. There are now plants sitting idle. There are now plants that are underutilized, and Donald Trump's policies are going to bring product back into those underutilized plants. There's going to be new investment. There's going to be new plants built. And the UAW members, and I brought 20 of them with me, they're sitting right over here. We support Donald Trump's policies on tariffs 100%. So, Mr. President, we can't thank you enough. And in 6 months or a year, we're going to begin to see the benefits. I can't wait to see what's happening 3 or 4 years down the road. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. What a great guy. He got it right from the beginning. He got it before almost anybody else. This group over there, they got it too. And you know, we won the state of Michigan. We won almost all of them, but we won Michigan by a lot, and I want to just thank you all. The auto workers were fantastic. The Teamsters were fantastic. Everyone was pretty good, I will tell you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're going to be very happy very soon, and you probably see what's happening with all of the, not only car companies, but car companies in particular. See it with all of the ones they're moving, they're announcing day in, day out. You're seeing it. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. With today's actions, we're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world. It's brutalized. Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products. They do the first can of milk. They do the first little carton of milk at a very low price, but after that it gets bad, and then it gets up to 275, 300%. So when they're figuring what's Canada charging, they say, oh, about 2%, 3%. But take a look at what happens down the road. When you look a little bit, it's not a pretty picture, and we don't like it, and it's not fair. It's not fair to our farmers. It's not fair to our country. And with countries like Canada, you know, we subsidize a lot of countries and keep them going and keep them in business. In the case of Mexico, it's $300 billion a year. In the case of Canada, it's close to $200 billion a year. And I say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, at what point do we say, you got to work for yourselves, and you got to, this is why we have the big deficits. This is why we have that amount of debt that's been placed on our heads over the last number of years, and we're really not taking it anymore. Through non-tariff barriers, the European Union bans imports of most American poultry. You understand? They say, we want to send you our cars, we want to send you everything, but we're not going to take anything that you have. Australia bans, and they're wonderful people and wonderful everything, but they ban American beef, yet we imported $3 billion of Australian beef from them just last year alone. They won't take any of our beef. They don't want it because they don't want
Trump, joined now by David Frum. David, thank you for coming on to the program at short notice here to do a a live breakdown and analysis. We're going to take a bit more of the president, see if there's some key news here, and then we'll jump to David in the next few minutes, get his early reactions and bop back and forth. So play along with us. Let's go back to the president.
113%, in Japan, our friend charges us 700%, but that's because they don't want us selling rice and other thing. Who can blame them, Madam Secretary? Agriculture, great job you did on eggs, by the way. The egg prices came down 50%. You got them down 50%. Once we got involved, they were going through the sky. The egg prices, they were going through the sky, and you did a fantastic job. Now we have lots of eggs, and they're much cheaper, down about 59% now, and they're going down further. We charge 2.8% for so many things that other countries are charging 200%, 300%, and 400% for. If imposing tariffs and protective barriers made nations poor, then every country on earth would be racing to eliminate these policies, and China would be the first on line. They run a very strong country, but they're not first in line, and the American people are paying a very big price. From 1789 to 1913,
okay, we were a tariff. David, let's keep the full screen of the president there. We'll just sense, David, there's a few rabbit holes that we're going to go down here before we get any news on a global tariff. We are seeing, though, David, a reiteration on autos, 25%, a global tariff. This would suggest, David, that the president really has dug in on this, and I assume that we should be thinking that Canada in the auto sector now officially has a problem.
Yeah. Well, first, let's just do a little compare and contrast. When Ronald Reagan came to office in 1981, he was campaigning on a tax cut plan that had been discussed for 2 years before he entered office, the Kemp-Roth tax cut. Everybody knew what the approximate shape of that tax cut would be. You could be for it, you could be against it, but you knew what you were going to get. And when you went into the voting booth on voting day, you knew what you were voting for or against. Barack Obama was not able to give people that much lead time because he was elected in the middle of a financial crisis. But again, the measures he took were broadly discussed, well understood. There's a big debate between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans wanted to bail out financial companies only. Democrats wanted to help also non-financial companies. You could cast your vote and take your choice. In this case, it's now April of the first year, almost halfway into the first year of the Trump presidency. And they are making it up. We are watching an announcement, and 15 minutes past the start time, we still have no idea what the president is going to do. We wonder whether he had any idea of what he was going to do at lunch today.
Right.
I wonder if he even has any idea what he's going to do as he's talking, because this gibberish, this flow of made-up numbers, suggests a man deep in the stream of consciousness who's still sort of winging it and hoping for inspiration. So never has so much of the world economy been up for grabs to the very last second behind a policy driven by equal combinations of ignorance and malice.
David, as we await the details of the president's announcement, I want to take up something else happening in Washington today. Canadians over the past several weeks, as you know, have felt like no one is speaking on our behalf or on the behalf of our bilateral trade relationship. But that appears to have changed in recent days. There is a debate taking place in the Senate, a bipartisan debate challenging the president's targeting of Canada with tariffs. Why don't you just reflect on it and its possible significance?
Yeah, this is a symbolic debate in the Senate about a sense of the Senate resolution to disapprove of the tariffs on Canada. It doesn't have any binding effect, but it looks like it's going to pick up about 5 Republican senators, including former Senate leader Mitch McConnell, who are going to cast their votes with the Democrats to condemn the trade war on Canada. In the immediate term, it doesn't mean much. Congress has delegated so much trade power to the president over the years that unless they were to take that power back, which would take a majority of both houses, they're quite powerless to stop him. But it is a warning, especially after the bad results that the president's party got in yesterday's vote, that his coalition may be coming under strain here. The president was promising, you'll see great results in a year, maybe 2, maybe 3. Well, people who are up for re-election in 2026, including the senator from North Carolina, Tom Tillis, who's one of the more endangered Republicans in the Senate. Many Republicans are endangered in the House. They're thinking, you're telling me that when I go to my job review, it's going to be misery and pain. But you're promising that at some point down the road, maybe a year, maybe two, maybe three, who knows, maybe a decade, maybe 100 years, there'll be some benefit. The Trump coalition is coming under pressure. This measure is so reckless. And meanwhile, I thought you were going to draw attention to another thing. Through the House and Senate are proceeding the Republican tax bills, which are for gigantic tax cuts aimed at the very top of the economy, with then special favors distributed maybe to people who are receiving tips, maybe to high-income retirees, maybe. Again, everything's very uncertain. It's like their signal group. They don't know what they're doing until the very last minute. And even after they've done it, they're not quite sure what they've done.
Yeah. It's interesting because off the top of the speech there, David, he did mention, in a sense, the billions in revenue and income that these tariffs will bring into the United States. And I think it's worth reminding viewers, like, this is an income tax. Like, it's such a bizarre scenario. Someone who haven't, campaigned on, a tax, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, is now implementing one of the largest, tax increases in recent American history.
Well, let's be very clear how crazy and impossible this is. If you collect revenue from a tariff, that means the tariff did not keep out the foreign good, and the domestic industry is as exposed to competition as ever. If the tariff does keep out the foreign good and the domestic industry gets the protection, which is presumably the point of this exercise, then you don't collect the tariff. It can't both protect and raise revenue. It's one or the other. And probably what will happen is it'll be some mixture of both, which is some domestic industries will get some protection and prices will therefore go up and consumers will pay those. And some revenue will be collected and consumers will pay those. What a tariff is the worst kind of consumption tax. It falls quite randomly according to what percentage of the product is imported from another country. Of course, it falls most heavily on those least able to pay. And everyone who studied this finds that if you're in the top 10%, it's a less burden. If you're in the top 1%, it's almost no burden at all. If you're in the bottom 50%, well, no tax on tips. Here's a tip for you. But meanwhile, you are going to be paying more for shoes, for clothes, for food.
David, let's just go back to the president. He's pulled up a billboard, I think, is coming out now. I'm a little curious as to what this prop is. Let's go sound up on the president.
China, first row. China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be, because we never charge anybody anything. But now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff. Taiwan, where they make...
I don't see Canada on that list yet.
Here's
My eyes
the
are
important point about here's the important thing about that chart. If you're doing a White House event, and you need an audiovisual aid, you make it big enough that the camera can see it, right? That's the whole point of this. And then if it's a little windy, as it is today, then you frame it, you put it on. What Trump brought out was the chart that was shown to him in the Oval Office at lunchtime or today. Right. And he liked it so much that he brought it out with him, and he's holding it up himself because he liked it. But it's an example of how this is all being they're winging it. Why isn't this chart a size big enough for the camera to see? Why isn't it propped up? Why is the president of the United States himself holding a chart? Presidents, you'll notice if you look at any other photograph of any other president, they never hold anything up because it's undignified. It detracts from the majesty of the person in the office. So he is acting in a way that tells us that this chart was prepared for lunch, and he liked it and brought it out because probably as of noon he wasn't quite sure what he was going to do.
But Sean, I mean, again, this is all unfolding chaotically before our eyes. But I mean, if that's a 34% reciprocal tariff on China on all Chinese imported goods, again, we don't exactly know what's being said here. Maybe this is a reciprocal tariff on Chinese chopsticks. I don't know, but these look like big numbers, Sean. This looks like he's gone possibly big.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what the principal motivation is. Is it about trade, or as David raised, is this really about trying to maximize revenue in the short term to reconcile the administration's interest in renewing the tax cut legislation and possibly augmenting it at the same time that it's facing new pressure on Washington's poor public finances? It's hard to put yourself in the shoes of President Trump, I understand, David, but help our audience understand what really is at the heart of today's announcement.
What's at the heart of today's announcement is that Donald Trump doesn't believe in a world of mutual benefit. He believes in I win, you lose. He thinks like a predator, whether it's sex, whether it's business, whether it's trade, whether it's politics. He thinks in terms of structures of domination and retaliation. So the whole idea of trade, one of the reasons it's all mumbo jumbo, is he doesn't understand what he's talking about. And it's like someone who's never seen the ocean trying to describe the sea and to understand what the sea does. He just doesn't get it. And so, I mean, he has this idea that if there's a trade deficit, you are somehow subsidizing the receiving company. The surplus country is subsidizing the receiving country. When, of course, if you're thinking this way, it's actually the subsidy runs the other way around. It's not the deficit country that is subsidizing the sending country. The sending country is sending products and receiving paper. But it's not, in his mind, what he sees is other countries seem to be doing well in some ways. Therefore, that's at the American expense. Therefore, that's at his expense, and therefore they must be punished. And then he throws around these numbers, which are little fragments of briefings, ill-remembered, snatching off displays that were shown to him at his lunch, and at trying to make sense of all of this. But meanwhile, what we all face, there's been a lot of talk over the past week about the risk of stagflation in the United States. But if it sounds like what we're heading for is not stagflation at all, but a true international depression. If Trump makes good on this, these are Smoot-Hawley level trade blows on a world economy that's already got a lot of question marks over it. It's the destruction of American leadership. And he's inviting people to negotiate with him after having demonstrated that his word is worthless. Who's going to do a deal with someone who said, well, I know I signed this agreement with Canada and Mexico in my first term. I don't consider myself bound by it at all. Well, if you're not bound, why would anybody sign a new deal with someone who repudiates the old at a whim?
Mm-hmm. Let's just briefly dip into the president's remarks again and see if where he is at in this charitably put freewheeling presentation.
At the gate, because the money is so enormous that you're talking about. There's never been probably anything like it in terms of the enormity. And there are a lot of bad things happen at the people that do the check-in, and they're looking at 10-year jail sentences if they do play. We're going to treat them so good, but if they cheat, the repercussions are going to be extremely strong. Foreign nations will finally be asked to pay for the privilege of access to our market, the biggest market in the world. We're right now the biggest market in the world. We had a great country 4 years ago in terms of the economics. We were doubling up on China. We were doing so well. Nobody was going to catch us, but so much of it slipped away over the last 4 years under Biden. I campaigned on this policy throughout last year, and today that promise was made, and it was also a promise, as you know, that was
32%, Japan, an ally, 24%. I guess we'll have to hear whether and when they're coming into effect, or if this is the start of a negotiation. Let's go back to the president for a moment.
And whether they're stacking, Rudyard, because we also have sectoral tariffs in different industries, including autos, aluminum, steel. So in certain instances, the tariffs on the screen may not even fully capture the degree of protection reflected in the administration's overall trade policy?
Tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America. And we've seen companies coming in like we've never seen
Let's
before.
go to David. Let's go sound down on
Likewise
the
to all of the foreign presidents, prime ministers.
What the president just said is that there's no tariff if you build your plant in America. And that just goes to how he doesn't understand anything. Say, okay, I'm Nissan. I want to escape the auto tariffs. I build my plant in America. Do I escape the tariff? Well, does your car use steel? Does your car use aluminum? Does your car use glass? No, you don't escape the tariff. You escape the tariff on your product, but you don't escape the tariff on all the inputs into your product. So every aspect of the American economy is going to be distorted and made more expensive and made less competitive. What he is doing is essentially, if we take him seriously, and I think we should, he's removing the United States from any idea of competing with world markets. This is the economic policy of Juan Perón, which is we're going to have an Argentine-made everything all the way up the value chain. Argentine iron going to make Argentine steel, to make Argentine cars. And the problem is none of those things are competitive with any on world markets with all the products that are traded more or less freely.
And David, it's one thing to target one country or some number of country with tariffs and anticipate that ultimately they'll come to the table in search of some type of accommodation or settlement because of the importance of the U.S. market. But just talk a bit about the geopolitics of essentially opening up trade wars with every country in the world. What are the risks for the United States?
Well, the risk is that other countries start working around you. He repeatedly described the United States as the largest economy in the world, which I think is true. But before Britain left the European Union, the EU was the largest economy in the world. And China is catching up. What if there were an EU-China free trade agreement? That's sort of unimaginable today.
David, just to break in one sec here, we're getting some, I'm seeing some feedback here that Trump is saying he will establish a universal baseline tariff of 10% that will apply to all countries in addition to the numbers he's already announced. So that means a country like China, this is the New York Times reporting, will face a 44% tariff on top of the 20% that Trump has already imposed, to answer the question that you were airing earlier. I mean, guys, this is big. Wow.
Or it's like the dictator from Woody Allen's Bananas. It's just a spewing of random digits that make no sense and that are just going to invite stock market crashes and disaster, because none of this works in any way. I think there's a kind of war on math here. That none of this works. All it does is cause dislocation, disruption, and eventually recession and depression.
Yeah. Sean, what do you think about that? Again, we don't know when these tariffs yet are coming in. We haven't got to that point in this rambling address. But I mean, again, we'd be stepping back a century, Sean, in terms of the global economy. We're going pre-Bretton Woods at this point.
Yeah, and as you both know, and some of our listeners and viewers will know, I spent some time in Ottawa, and if you spend a day in Ottawa, you hear the proverbial story of the Canadian automobile that crosses the border half a dozen times or more through the production process. And so, as David says, I think one of the open questions here is if the president understands the sophistication of these integrated supply chains and the costs and distortions of trying to effectively unravel them. I think there's a lot of people in the next few days who are going to have to figure out what precisely this means when different inputs are subject to different tariff rates, and the entire process now is at the whim of politics as opposed to markets. David, I want to come to you with a question, because there's been some discussion that in the past few weeks, the administration's tariff policy was being assumed by the new U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, who is on one hand a true believer, but on the other hand more of a sophisticated technocrat than Howard Lutnick and the others who were carrying the ball early after inauguration. Are you familiar? What do you think of that discussion? And in any way, does today's shambolic announcement challenge that narrative?
Mike Murphy, the veteran campaign guru, had a line in 2016 that teaching Donald Trump to talk about policy was like teaching Charles Manson to foxtrot. He could maybe do a step or two, but then he'd put a pencil in your eye because he was Charles Manson. So I think the technocrats have a lot on their consciences here. That there has been a big project on right and left over the past half decade to kind of rehabilitate tariffs. And yes. The Hewlett Foundation has been a big charitable, which is a huge foundation, has been funding a lot of this work. And what they're interested in getting, they want something new. They're bored. Hewlett Foundation is bored with the world economy, bored with the market, and they want a new paradigm. And so they spread money across the landscape to encourage clever people to come up with alternatives to the new paradigm. And it is true about tariffs that on a blackboard, you can create scenarios where a tariff is welfare enhancing. If you assume this condition, if you assume that condition, if everything is done, and if there's no politics and no friction and no other countries in the world, you can create a scenario where there's two countries trading with each other. One country can impose tariffs on a way that is welfare enhancing inside that country. It can theoretically be done. Just doesn't happen in life. True in theory, not in practice. Well, those people are now working for Trump, and they convinced themselves they could make use of Trump. But anyone who convinces himself or herself that he can make use of Trump is a fool, because Trump is uncontrollable. He is driven by rage, he is driven by malice, he is driven by hate. He is not interested in welfare maximization, except himself and maybe on a good day, some of his relatives.
Yeah.
And on a bad day, maybe Vladimir Putin. And so, of course, you get this chaotic mix. And the technocrats are to blame here. They should have quit. They should have refused to be part of this. They should be out there sounding the drum. Because the way you stop a global depression right now is for House and Senate to vote. You know what, Mr. President, we delegated these powers to you over the years. We made a big mistake. You've abused them. We're taking them back. The Constitution puts us in charge of trade. We're taking our trade authority back. We're going to write the tariff bill.
Yeah. Let's go dip in again with the president. We are, again, getting reports that there is no press release. No one knows what's going on. People are squinting at these charts trying to see if their country is on it and what the number is. But we know the universal 10% tariff is on top of these already very significant tariffs he's levied against China, India, and others. Let's listen in a bit.
But we have to start taking care of our country now. We can't do what we've been doing for the last 50 years. From the day of my election, the stock market went up in my first term 88%. With NASDAQ going up 155%
can I just jump in for a second?
More than.
We're getting some reports from journalists who are Canadian journalists on site that Canada is not on the list and that they're awaiting more details from the White House. So that could mean that
not
Canada
on the list, Sean, means not on the prop. I mean, it might be a very big list. Like, this is just so crazy, guys. This is really crazy.
As I said earlier, he didn't know at lunch what he was going to do. And I said, I don't know that as he's talking, he knows what he's going to do. And when he finishes, nobody will know what he has just done.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're left squinting at a chart to try to see the difference between Cameroon and Canada. to know what's going to happen here. I'm sure details will be forthcoming at some point. I'm partly in jest, but only partly.
And it's important to note for audience members: one, Canada-U.S. do something like $1 trillion of trade per year, and two, bilateral exports to the United States represent something like a third of Canadian GDP. So here we have one man rambling on stage and ostensibly his staff scrambling to make sure that the policy details align with his rambles. And it goes at the heart of a $1 trillion bilateral relationship and 1/3 of Canada's overall economic activity. It is a reminder of the extent to which Canada's economy is now at the whims of President Trump.
Yeah. Well, let's listen to a few of those whims as they're being spun out in the Rose Garden.
It's such an honor to be finally able to do this. If you look at China, I took in hundreds of billions of dollars in my term, hundreds of billions. They never paid 10 cents to any other president, and yet they paid hundreds of billions, so much so that Biden couldn't do anything. They wanted to try and terminate it because he had a very special relationship with China. You know what the relationship was? He had a special relationship. But the numbers were so big, that they couldn't do it. So they did ease it up. They did things that they shouldn't have done. They made it a lot more comfortable for them, but they couldn't do it because the numbers were hundreds of billions of dollars, and I did that. And we were on our way to doing something like incredible. And then we had a very bad election happen, a very bad election. A lot of bad things happened. So when I said we got to do it again, I said we have to make it too big to rig. And we made it too big to rig, and we won in records, and it was a monumental win. And it was such an honor to see so many of you, like Brian and your friends, here with us.
Let's bail on this. The Canadian dollar, I think, briefly popped over 70 cents when people were squinting at the chart and didn't see Canada's name on it. So let's see if Canada shows up. Obviously, there will be some larger kind of statement, we hope, policy brief or something that gets dropped after the president stops speaking. But we know with him that could be quite a while. David, talk to us about these very high tariffs on allies like Japan, Taiwan. I mean, you know, America is confronting its single largest geopolitical threat in the form of China. And here you have these two critical Asian partners with, if we're correct, that the 10% global levy is on top of levies in the 20s and 30% on Taiwan and Japan. You're just talking massive, massive tariffs on key allies.
You're talking about welcome to the Chinese century. Because Japan and Korea, they have to trade with somebody. They are highly specific economies. They don't produce everything. They don't have the delusion of self-sufficiency. They have to trade with somebody. And if the United States says we are leaving the global economy, the globe is still there. The United States may disappear from it, but India and China and others beckon. And it's very clear in Trump's the only allies he cares about are Russia, Saudi Arabia, and El Salvador. And that's it. That is Trump's legacy. That is the American alliance system. He's at the same. There have been leaks that he's actually contemplating unilateral military action against Greenland, which is a war with Denmark, which is a NATO country. I mean, a lot of this is madness, but because it's mad, we shouldn't assume that none of it will happen.
David, speak to Canadian policymakers for a moment. As someone who's committed to free trade and open markets and a system of global cooperation, what is your advice to Canadian policymakers in this campaign? Some are arguing we need to revisit our relationship with China. Others talking about strengthening economic and security ties with Europe. Then there are others who are saying, of course, notwithstanding the Trump administration threats and provocations, we are fundamentally a North American country. What the heck are we supposed to do in the face of something like this?
Well, geography doesn't change, of course. Canada is a North American country, and the United States, under any rational government of the United States, would be, of course, the most important partner for Canada, inevitably. But you can't wish any of this away. And we have talked often on our conversations together about the need for a plan A and a plan B. And plan A was to believe that the traditional methods of diplomacy with the United States would work even with Trump. And I think plan A just went up in smoke. So that means plan B. And that means and let us have no illusions that this is going to lead to the same prosperity that you got from plan A in the days when plan A worked. But if your partner in plan A won't play ball, then that means Canada should be should be working with Mexico in the North American context, with Asian allies, with China. I mean, if Trump determines that the United States is going to exit every bilateral arrangement, break every article of faith, and if Congress doesn't stop him, which it can, but if it declines to do that, partners like Canada are going to be left with no choice to make whatever arrangements they can. including for their security. I mean, if Trump is really talking about invading the territory of Denmark, Denmark needs security partners. The person who's threatening to invade you is not a security partner.
Yeah. Let's take a couple questions because we've had an active group in the chat. So David, I know they're keen to put a couple questions to you. So I'm going to go over to Elliot Gross, our producer here, who's in studio, and see if she can read us a question that that you can give some thoughts to. Elliot, we're just going to give her a sec. As we do that, David, let me just add one more question. We're getting some reporting. Again, all this is just so uncertain. So take this all as information that's going to need to be clarified, that the Canada and Mexico will still face the 25% fentanyl tariffs, that these are not, in a sense, off the table. And obviously, does the 10% baseline tariff get stacked on top of the 25% auto tariff? So we've got 35% on autos. I don't know. There's a lot of details to figure out here, David. But when you put this all together and you think of Canada's situation vis-a-vis some of these other allies, and again, it was a big list there that he showed on the stage, are we maybe seeing something positive, that this president knows that it's dangerous to pick a fight with Mexico and Canada simultaneously?
I think you're seeing a heart attack for the whole automobile industry in the United States. So one of the things I've spent a little bit of time talking to auto dealers. So one of the things that seems to be happening, and again, there's a lot of uncertainty, but if you placed an order for a car 2 weeks ago, for a car to be made to your specifications, and that car is not on the lot yet, the tariff will hit before the car arrives. So you may have bought a car for, let us say, I don't know, $35,000. You put down a $3,500 deposit today, and then they say, no, the car's not $35,000. It's $45,000 or whatever it's going to be. You then have a choice. Do I pay this extra windfall penalty tax, or do I walk away from my deposit? And a number of people will say, you know what, I think I'd better walk away from my deposit rather than sign up for this giant tax increase. So there could be auto cancellations. There could be just a seizure of economic opportunity, economic activity. And the funny thing is, you know, the people around Elon Musk, they all think they're the heroes from Atlas Shrugged, and they've turned into the villains from Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah. In that vein, may I just say, one of the United States leading trade policy experts, someone I know who David's work has relied upon in the past, Douglas Irwin, is estimating that the net effect of these tariffs, as we understand them in this moment, is bigger than Smoot-Hawley, the tariffs brought in the 1930s that exacerbated the Great Depression. And so David's insight that we could be heading in a similar direction, if indeed these tariffs are implemented and remain in place for some time, may regrettably prove right.
And again, we do not have to have the global depression. All that needs to happen is majority of Congress. The Republicans have tiny majorities in the two houses of Congress. So you know what? We're taking this power back.
Yeah. Let's take a couple of audience questions here. So Elliot Gross, over to you.
Okay, question from the chat. They're coming in super quickly, so sorry if I missed your guys' names. Someone's asking, when should the Liberal and Conservative leaders respond?
Yeah. So David, what do you think? Do we just kind of let this whole weirdness that we saw today and whatever comes out of this, I don't know, just look at it like a thunderstorm and let it roll by? Or is there, I don't know, is there a reason to engage right now? It seems like the fog of war at this moment.
People with responsibility shouldn't respond until they know what they're responding to. So it's fine for us who are trying to help people make sense of what's just happened to use our best guesses, our best judgment, speak freely. If we're wrong here on the Hub about any particular, the consequences are, you know, we're wrong. If a political leader is wrong, the consequences could be more serious. So I would strongly advise leaders of parties, diplomats, just wait till tomorrow at least, because again, this could all fall apart really fast. Yeah. We may wake up tomorrow morning and the world economy, world stock markets crater, Congress reacts or the president panics, and that chart that he looked at lunch, he comes out with another chart from the next lunch.
Yeah. Well, wise words. Let's go back to Elliot Gross. The chat is super busy, so we're going to get to, you got to go at the top of the hour, David, but we're going to try to get some more questions to you now.
Okay, this is a question for David. What are the chances that Carney has managed to make a one-by-one deal with Trump, exempting Canada to the worst of this?
Yeah, so the perception, David, that Trump and Carney had a very good call the other week. Does this kind of set the Liberals up for, I don't know, if Canada is not on this list and we're only subject to 10%, that's not great, but our currency's probably adjusted 10% since Trump was elected. Does this create a perception that the Liberals are the kind of horse whisperers when it comes to the Trump administration?
Well, two problems here. First, nothing said on a phone call with Donald Trump can be relied upon. So we don't know what happened. Trump's word is not good. But the thing that Canadians need to understand is even if somehow Canada gets more lightly soaked by this global storm, if there is a world economic crisis, Canada's going to feel it. Canada's interest is not just bilateral access to the U.S. market, minus 10% of waste and stupidity. But Canada's interest is making sure that the whole world economy functions. If Trump steers the world economy into a depression, Canada will suffer, even if Canada continues to have less hampered access to the U.S. market than other countries do. And there's no guarantee of that. When Trump says I had a good call, Trump is never willing to say hard things to people's faces. He only says it to people's backs.
Yeah. Let's go back to Elliot. Let's get some more questions in for David in his remaining 5 minutes with us.
Is there anything that could make Trump reverse himself, or is this set in stone? Would a big enough market fall make him change? A question from Ryan in the chat.
So there's a perception, David, that Trump is highly sensitive to the stock market, but in some ways, I think maybe the last month or so, we've seen something else here. He and his own officials are now talking about, corrections are corrections. We may have a recession. We're going to come out the other side stronger. Are they, in a sense, a little more committed to these policies and the potential negative economic consequences of them than in the first administration?
He seems committed to this Thelma and Louise joyride. And he surrounded himself with people who are time servers and cowards. And this is why when you ask about the technocrats, I think they're people of bad or weak character who are around him. And so that, and they were selected for that. They were selected for weakness. But remember, this is Congress's power he is wielding with Congress's delegation. So yes, there's something that can stop him, and that is for half a dozen Republicans in the House and half a dozen in the Senate to vote with the Democrats to say, you know what, we are voiding all of these emergency powers. The Constitution put trade in our hands. We've delegated it to the president over decades because we thought the president was more responsible about trade than Congress. This president has proven himself less responsible. It's like giving a Ming vase to an orangutan. He's just smashing. Take it away from him. Congress can take it back. And assert its power that way. But I don't know the hope of reasoning with Donald Trump. At this point, this is egos involved. I mean, what does he say? Oh, the financial market said the most cherished of my idea of my life is dumb and stupid and harmful. Well, this market has been telling him that since January. The most cherished idea of your life is dumb and stupid and harmful. Yeah. Don't do it. And he's been doing it anyway. He's not. Yeah. I don't know. Let's hope bad stock market news stops him before there's real economic pain. But that doesn't look to be the way things are breaking.
Certainly today, this afternoon. Okay, let's squeeze in a couple more questions. Elia, over to you.
Probably be the last one that we have with David. So a question from Tom. Who do we see as leading the opposition against this internally in the U.S.? Who in the Democrats or Republicans is going to step up to challenge this?
Great question, Tom. So, David, we've seen the legislative branch so far be pretty permissive with regarding this administration. Not just the Republicans, if you want to be honest about it. You could say the Democrats, similarly, to the extent that they have influence, are kind of on their back foot too.
The person who could stop it is John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, and half a dozen rational-minded House Republicans. They could stop it. They could stop it this afternoon. They could stop it first thing tomorrow morning. That's the locus of power. Is again, these are delegated powers. The president is not wielding constitutional powers. He's wielding delegated powers. The delegation can be removed.
Right. Okay, David, you've been super generous with your time. I'm just going to allow Sean Spear to get a final wrap-up question in, and then Sean and I will keep going. Tons of activity in the chat there, Sean, so we'll get to some more of those questions.
Yeah, David, looking forward, what should we be watching for even in the next 24 hours or so to make a sense of the significance of today's announcement?
Well, in addition to the market, the financial markets, we have seen all kinds of signs of trouble from the metrics that measure manufacturing activity. The manufacturing industries do not love this. That in all this, the producer reports are signs of trouble. And we are going to see more and more of those merger and acquisition activity that doesn't happen. We today in Bloomberg, the head of the owner of the company that makes Ozempic said, "I am not going to be investing in the United States. I'm looking for deals in India and China." So the harm will spread, as it did with Smoot-Hawley, from the financial sector to the economy of things. And I think we should be looking for signals from the economy of things.
Yeah, well said. Thanks, David.
David, we're just so fortunate to have you here at the Hub, especially during these tumultuous times. Thank you so much for your wise words, your insight, your considered opinion. It's just such a pleasure to connect.
I wish we didn't have to be here. This does feel like one of those August 1914 moments where the world is walking into something so crazy, so stupid, so destructive, and so tragically unnecessary, all of it driven by one man's ignorance and malice.
Yeah. The lights went out. Let's see what happens in the coming days. David, we'll say goodbye to you, and Sean and I are going to continue here with some commentary and connecting with our audience who've been super busy in the chat. Sean, we'll take the show up to an hour, so that gives us another 10 to 15 minutes to really dig into questions with the Hub audience, which is great. The whole purpose of these live YouTube streams is to hear from our audience. Sean, before we do that, just your reflection, thinking what David said there at the end, that resonates with me. Sometimes you look back through history at these moments that become significant because they do represent, tectonic plates forced together that cause an eruption, and then that energy that is released, it's bigger than any one actor. It's bigger than the president. And the size of these tariffs, it's no surprise that this announcement came after the market closed today, because there are very, very significant punishing tariffs on a lot of economies around the world, including, again, surprisingly, a lot of American allies.
Yeah, if I have a weakness, Roger, it's that I'm inclined to think about these types of things through the lens of ideas. As Richard Weaver famously said, ideas have consequences. And we've been living in a paradigm for the better part of 40 years or so that preferenced open markets and free trade and global cooperation, and it's not been perfect. In fact, we've been critical of aspects of that paradigm at the Hub. But generally speaking, I think it's been good for Canada. I'd argue it's been good for the United States, and it's certainly been good for the world. And the first Trump administration represented a challenge to that paradigm. But I think today's announcement, if it's ultimately implemented, if we effectively have the rise of a trade war between the United States and China, it will represent an end to it. And the question, of course, for Canadians and others is what comes next.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to Elliot Gross and more questions from the chat.
So Barney in the chat is asking, what does a global economy look like without the U.S.?
Yeah, interesting question. In a sense, if the U.S. is taking itself out of the global economy in terms of being the centerpiece for the free, open exchange of people, goods, and ideas, which was this central role that America played, Sean, in globalization for going on, half a century. How big is that?
Yeah, I just think it is big, of course. And I just wonder, Roger, if some of these people in the United States, in and around the Trump administration, the so-called new right, something that we've profiled at the Hub over the past several weeks because we thought it was important for our audience to understand who these people are and and what animates them, you do get the sense, Rudyard, that they're making a pretty big bet here, that they can in effect poke several different countries in the eye at the same time, and that the inherent pull towards the U.S. market because of its market size and its capital and its innovation and all the rest will cause these various countries to turn the other cheek. That may have been the case if you were poking one country in the eye, or maybe a smaller country in the eye. But Europe, China, other parts of Asia, reports, Rudyard, that they're going to impose 17% tariffs on Israel. One wonders if they're going to look back on this huge bet that they've made that they can do this in effect without any costs or consequences, and realize that they made a big mistake.
Yeah. Just want to quickly show a graph that we saw at the Hub before coming on air today. It's an interesting set of numbers, Sean. Let me just briefly explain this. It comes from Deutsche Bank, and it shows the tariffs as a percentage of GDP going way back to the beginning of the 20th century, when we really had a pretty high tariff regime. And look, under even Smoot-Hawley in the 30s as a percentage of GDP. That first square that you see at 1.2%, way over there on what is my right-hand side, that is where we were before today's announcement, because so much more of the American economy today is caught up in this new global economy that is, the story of the last 100 years. So that number is going to be even higher now at tariffs as a percentage of U.S. GDP. This is a big deal, Sean. Like, we have gone back to the future here in a big, big way. And that number is going to have to be rewritten tomorrow morning, even higher than 1901, when the world was, deep into tariffs, a decade and a half out from the First World War.
Yeah, and what's frustrating about this, Roger, is that I don't want to speak for you, but just speaking for myself, I think the administration has a case to prosecute against unfair trade practices by particularly China, and I think in a new era of geopolitical competition with China, I think the administration could have built a kind of coalition of the willing to try to protect our economies from both China's unfair practices, but also the security threat that it represents. But instead, it has gone about systematically burning bridges, undermining allies, and as you said, I think so insightfully during the conversation with David, in a way undermining its own capacity to ultimately beat China in what will be an economic and geopolitical competition that may indeed define this century. I'm an American file. I don't have an anti-American bone in my body. In fact, one of my kids is an American citizen. And I think all of us have a vested interest in America succeeding. And it's just, it's disappointing. It's sad, frankly, Rudyard, to see an administration doing such vandalism to the economic and geopolitical interests of the United States, and in turn, so many others of us around the world.
Yeah, just a quick update that reporters at the event have been handed an 8-page sheet of countries that will be receiving these reciprocal tariffs. And they're being told by administration officials that the base tariff, the global base tariff of 10%, is not in addition to these numbers, like 34% on China. So China's not getting hit with 44, which would just be absolutely punitive, but it's still a 34% tariff. It's still a 20 odd percent tariff on Europe. So we'll have to see again if reporters are digging out a Canadian number. It seems like a lot of small countries in Africa and elsewhere, embattled countries that are in the midst of civil war and starvation, risks are on this tariff list. This is a global, comprehensive list, 8 pages long, listing individual customized reciprocal tariffs for each and every country. Let's go back to our live chat, and we'll get a couple more questions in.
Depressed Canadian in the chat is asking, would it make sense for the next Canadian government whether it's liberal or conservative, to have or to form a mixed party cabinet?
Sean, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, implicit in the question is that Canada is facing something akin to a world war where we have had an experience of unity or coalition governments. I think it's certainly too early to know whether that's the type of risk we're facing, and if indeed we need to take extraordinary steps like the one the questioner asked about. I would say, Roger, one thing I've thought a lot about in recent days is at the end of this election, whatever party ultimately forms government will need to ensure that it has strong regional representation from across the country, because, of course, any type of renegotiation of the USMCA or a successor agreement is going to interact with different regional interests, and I think it'll be important for those regions to feel like they are part of the conversation. Roger, there's always a risk of talking about these things in real time,
it's
but
fun.
I'm getting
That's part of the fun,
feedback.
Sean. We're doing this by the seat of our pants. So,
well, precisely. So I'm getting some
please light
feedback
yours on fire
from our colleagues at the hub that Canada may in fact be exempted from this round of announcements, that USMCA compliant exports may not be subject to incremental tariffs. At the risk of projecting forward with only partial information, let's just talk about what that could mean for the election campaign. There's one scenario, Rudyard, where if that's indeed the case, then no doubt Mark Carney and the Liberals will argue that it reflects the positive phone call that he had with President Trump late last week. And it's a sign that Carney is indeed the best position to represent Canadian interests vis-a-vis the administration in a post-election negotiation. You said to me something earlier today, though, that I thought was interesting and worth platforming. What's the case that this issue of Trump and tariffs dissipating a bit may actually be good for the Conservatives?
Yeah, look, I think we know from David Coletto and other pollsters that we're talking to here at the Hub that if this is an election that's fought on pocketbook issues, on affordability, on people's sense of the pernicious effects of inflation on their lives and reduced standards of living, then that is the Conservatives' battleground where they want to be contesting votes. But if, and again, we don't know because this is such a fluid situation, but if we've escaped large reciprocal tariffs, I mean, we still have, let's not forget, Sean, notable tariffs on aluminum, steel, autos, and we have no doubt a very tough renegotiation of CUSMA coming up. But that, to me, would potentially help the Conservatives because it would take this issue of Trump, in a sense, out of the election for the remaining 3 weeks to a large extent, and that would have to be a question of voters' assessment of the competency of these relative leaders to deal with that renegotiation. But we wouldn't be in a live debate about the scope of retaliations. You haven't done enough. I would do more, bidding war. And generally, it might refocus Canadians on what were the big issues coming into this election. That the feeling that standards of living were falling for a lot of different age cohorts. So we'll continue to keep an eye on this, and obviously everyone's updating each other all the time. Elliot, let's come back to you for another question.
Matthew Giffen in the chat asks, what's the point of renegotiating USMCA with Trump when he has already demonstrated that his word is worthless?
Yeah. We've thought a bit about this, I'm sure as others have, that these Trump tariffs are clearly a feature, not a bug now, of U.S. politics and his administration, Sean. I mean, it's hard to see this president clearly who gets so much out of this, both politically, personally, the power that these tariffs confer on him. They put him at the center of the global economy. So even if we didn't get hit today, who's to say, as David said, that we're not back at this in 24 hours, 72 hours, 6 months, 18 months?
Yeah, it's a real risk. It's something, incidentally, that Pierre Poilievre mentioned in his speech today as well. Which what I think it's worth taking up again with the virtue of having some time to have thought about his remarks and place them in the context of Donald Trump's press conference late this afternoon. I think Poilievre's speech today was significant, Rudyard. Up until now, him and his party have been making these rapid-fire announcements each day. One of the downsides of that type of campaign strategy is it may cause voters not to see the coherence or the theory of the case, as you often put it, that links together some of these different policy pronouncements. I thought the speech did an effective job today telling that story, essentially connecting the dots and setting out a vision for economic policy making should he become prime minister. And I thought it was a pretty compelling one. But most importantly, it seems to me, Rudyard, it rejected calls that we're seeing from different circles that on the next government to effectively embrace our own version of economic nationalism, as if the way to fight Trump's economic nationalism is to have our own form of it. And I think we saw something quite different from Poilievre today, a set of policies and a vision to unlock private capital, to unleash major resource projects, and to kind of double down on a free market set of ideas that I think is compelling and an interesting contrast with what we've seen from Mark Carney and the Liberals, who've in recent days have committed to effectively nationalizing our housing industry and de facto nationalizing our automobile industry in the name of trying to build a made in Canada car. So I think the contours of these different conceptions of the role of government and markets in the face of Trump's threat is going to be a big part of the campaign moving forward.
Yeah. Well, Sean, we are at the hour mark here, so a terrific show. It's always a little bit of an experiment here at the Hub. We're trying out different things with this live YouTube studio, and we really appreciate David coming onto the program. We appreciate all the viewers who are here, and we just remind them, Sean, that this studio is open to them every morning at 10 a.m. Eastern as we dig into the campaign each and every day. The two of us with great guests coming on to share the latest analysis and insights. So please, viewers, join us here at the Hub's YouTube channel each morning during the election at 10 a.m. and get more of this type of content. In the meantime, we'll be back at our desks right now, busy working away, getting you, our best experts, to feed in on what's just happened over the last hour and 15 minutes. And that'll be appearing on the Hub later this evening and in your Hub newsletter tomorrow morning. If you don't have a Hub subscription, you can grab one on us right now, free trial subscription during the election. We think we got great content that you're going to like. So go to www.thehub.ca, click on the join button, and look for that free trial offer. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Sean, you got to get your keyboard smoking. I'm going to let you do that, and we'll go from there. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.